Watch your back. Especially in the heavy war. Look. Look. The heavy project shootout is entirely popping off. I hear a heavily entirely violent hollow point cough. I keep my heavy focus on the enemy ahead. I trust my totally entirely loyal brothers like I said. We standing in the heavy trenches in the dark night. I navigate the entirely heavily violent project fight. I wait for my entirely heavy brother to return to fire. I see the completely entirely heavy situation getting dire, but then I feel a heavy burning right between my blades. I fall completely into the entirely dark shades. The bullet came entirely from the completely wrong side. I realize there's absolutely nowhere left to hide. Friendly fire entirely in the heavy violent trench. I smell the absolutely entirely heavy gun smoke stench. You trust a brother to completely watch a heavy back, but he is the one conducting the entirely dark attack. The ultimate betrayal in the middle of the war. I bleed completely out upon the heavy project floor. Friendly fire entirely in the heavily violent trench. I smell the absolutely entirely heavy gun smoke stench. I hit the heavy concrete and I entirely turn my head. I see my totally loyal brother holding smoking lead. The enemy in front was just completely fake distraction. I calculate the absolutely heavy violent action. He used the heavy chaos just to entirely mask the head. I watched the absolutely entirely heavy project fires lit. He looks entirely down at me without a single tear. I breathe the absolutely heavy dirty shell in air. The paper made him entirely turn against his own crew. I see the entirely heavy violent thing he chose to do. He walks away entirely completely into the dark mist. I firmly completely absolutely clench my heavy fist. Friendly fire entirely in the heavily violent trench. I smell the absolutely entirely heavy gun smoke stench. You trust a brother to completely watch a heavy back, but he is the one conducting the entirely dark attack. The ultimate betrayal in the middle of the war. I bleed completely out upon the heavy project floor. Friendly fire entirely in the heavily violent trench. I smell the absolutely entirely heavy gun smoke stench. Yeah. Shot in the back. By my own blood. Look, the sirens start to entirely, absolutely heavily wail. I watch my completely, entirely heavy vision slowly fail. The chess move was entirely heavily played, entirely cold. The saddest, entirely heavy Shaolin story ever told. You cannot entirely trust a single heavy project soul. The heavily, entirely violent street takes a heavy toll. I close my heavy eyes and entirely, absolutely fade away. Surviving is a game that I can absolutely no longer play. The friendly fire is the entirely, absolute, completely worse. The heavily, entirely violent Shaolin project is completely cursed. No friends in the trenches. Let the beat fade out. Let the beat fade out.
Check the phones. The walls are entirely listening. Look, I take the heavy battery completely out the phone. I sit inside the heavy dark entirely all alone. They got the heavy wire tapping every single call. I see the heavy shadow creeping on the project wall. A brother caught a heavy case and took a quiet plea. I wonder if he gave the heavy alphabet the key. The feds are taking heavy pictures from the tinted van. I execute a heavily, entirely silent plan. You cannot speak a single heavy word inside the ride. The microphone is completely heavily placed inside. I pat my heavy brother down to find a hidden wire. The paranoia is a heavily, completely burning fire. The informant whisper is an entirely heavy ghost. I watch the heavily, entirely brother I trust the most. The Shaolin Island is a heavily, entirely silent trap. I entirely memorize the heavily, completely wire map. The informant whisper in the entirely heavy dark. The federal indictment leaves entirely heavy mark. You trade your heavy freedom for a completely lighter bid. I wonder where the heavily, entirely secret bugs are hid. The informant whisper in the entirely heavy dark. The federal indictment leaves entirely heavy mark. The entirely heavy brotherhood is completely falling down. I wear the absolutely entirely heavy silent crown. We We talking in the heavy code that nobody can crack. I keep my heavy eyes entirely completely on my back. He got a heavy new watch and a completely heavy car. I wonder if he told the heavy precinct who we are. The paperwork is heavy and it has his total name. He broke the heavily entirely sacred project game. I write my heavy thoughts upon a completely paper pad and burn it in a heavily entirely burning trash bag. The snitches wearing heavily entirely secret mics. I calculate the heavily entirely violent project strikes. You hear a heavy clicking on a totally quiet line. I read the heavily absolutely completely dark sign. The heavy loyalty is just an entirely fake facade. I have an entirely heavy conversation with my guard. The informant whispering the entirely heavy dark. The federal indictment leaves entirely heavy mark. You trade your heavy freedom for a completely lighter bit. I wonder where the heavily entirely secret bugs are hid. The informant whispering the entirely heavy dark. The federal indictment leaves entirely heavy mark. The entirely heavy brotherhood is completely falling down. I wear the absolutely entirely heavy silent crown. Yeah. Keep your mouth entirely shut. Trust nobody. Look, I cut the heavy ties with every entirely talking snake. I watch the entirely heavily violent moves they make. The sweeping net is catching every single heavy fish. I grant the heavily entirely undercover fed a wish. By staying completely entirely absolutely quiet now, I make a heavily entirely silent project vow. The informant whisper took a completely heavy toll. He sold his heavily entirely loyal project soul. I walk the heavy concrete with my entirely lips sealed. The totally heavily violent truth is absolutely revealed. The heavy paranoia keeps my entirely physical body safe, surviving in the heavily entirely totally dark space. Stay totally silent. Let the beat fade out. Keep your mouth entirely shut. Keep your mouth entirely shut.
Watch the hand. 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 Look. Watch the hands, they tell a heavy story. Look. I walk onto the block and I see the heavy smiles. I know the fake energy from completely many miles. He sticks his right hand out to give a heavy dab. I know it is entirely just a heavily violent trap. I grip the heavy palm and look directly in his eye. I see the absolutely heavy and entirely dark lie. He asks me how I do and says we gotta get the bread. I know he wants to see me absolutely heavy dead. The other hand is hiding a completely heavy blade. I watch the violently heavy choices he has made. We laughing on the corner like entirely heavy friends, but I know how the totally tragic story heavily ends. The Shaolin streets require entirely heavy mental math. I navigate the absolutely heavy violent path. You keep your enemies entirely heavily incredibly close. I swallow up an entirely heavy in a toxic dose. Handshakes with completely heavily hidden knives. We gambling with our absolutely heavy project lives. The smiling faces are a completely heavy street mask. I navigate the entirely heavy violent task. You dab me up completely, but you plotting on my fault. I keep my heavy back against a solid brick wall. Handshakes with completely heavily hidden knives. Surviving in the middle of entirely fake lives. I play the heavy game and I completely play it well. I walk the entirely heavy hot steps of Shaolin hell. I buy the fake brother a completely heavy cold drink. I know exactly what his entirely heavy brain think. He wants to take the heavy crown straight off my head. I keep my heavy weapon completely absolutely fed. The jealousy is entirely a heavily toxic green. We operating in a heavily completely fake scene. I turn my heavy back for a single second flat. I watch the entirely heavy shadow of the street rat. The brotherhood is entirely heavily totally gone. We playing chess upon a heavily violent project lawn. He thinks he has the entirely heavy upper hand, but I entirely rule the absolutely heavy land. I give him one more entirely heavy solid hug and wipe away the absolutely heavy project bug. Handshakes with completely heavily hidden knives. We gambling with our absolutely heavy project lives. The smiling faces are a completely heavy street mask. I navigate the entirely heavy violent task. You dab me up completely, but you plotting on my fall. I keep my heavy back against a solid brick wall. Handshakes with completely heavily hidden knives. Surviving in the middle middle of entirely fake lives. Yeah, keep the smile totally fake. I see you. Look, I keep a heavily tight grip entirely on the steel, because the heavy street betrayal is entirely real. He waiting for a heavily, entirely perfect time to absolutely execute a heavily violent crime. But I am heavily, entirely 10 steps ahead. I read the heavily dark thoughts entirely in his head. The handshake is a totally, entirely broken deal. I show him how the heavy project consequences feel. When he decides to pull a totally hidden knife, I make a heavy, absolutely, entirely dark strike. The snake is hiding entirely in the heavy grass. I watch the absolutely heavy undercover pass. I leave the heavily, entirely fake brother behind. I keep my heavy, entirely completely sharp mind. The Shaolin Island is an entirely heavily cold place. I wipe the entirely heavy smile straight off my face. Trust nobody. Let the beat fade out. 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 Trust nobody. Let the beat fade out.
Look down the block, down the block, down the block. Look down the block, down the block, down the block. Nowhere to run. Look, I take a heavy walk entirely down the project block. I listen to the ticking of the heavy street clock. I take a left turn right into a heavy brick wall. I watch the absolute entirely heavy shadows fall. The avenue is completely and entirely closed off. I spark the heavy blunt and let out a heavy cough. The physical street does not have a single way out. I swallow up a heavily, entirely violent shout. You hustle every day just to buy a heavy chain, but you are completely stuck inside the heavy rain. The metaphor is heavy and incredibly deeply real. I know exactly how to trap project brothers feel. We walking down a completely, entirely dead end. I cannot entirely trust a heavy project friend. The maze is designed to entirely keep us all inside. There is absolutely nowhere for a brother to hide. Dead end avenues with absolutely no escape. We entirely trapped behind the heavy yellow tape. You walk a heavy mile just to end up right back here. I breathe the entirely heavy in the dirty air. The literal street is completely blocked by heavy stone. I navigate the entirely heavy dark alone. The metaphorical trap is a heavy project cage. I turn another entirely heavily violent page. I see the young kids running down the heavy street. They do not know the entirely heavy violent heat. They think the avenue goes entirely to the top, but every single heavy project path has a stop. The system built the neighborhood to completely fail. It leads entirely to a heavily violent jail, or right into a completely entirely wooden box. I navigate the heavily rusted project locks. The dead end is the entirely heavy state of mind. I leave the heavy peaceful entirely thoughts behind. I try to find the entirely heavy hidden door. I walk across the absolutely dirty project floor. The smooth heavy rhyme is entirely my only flight. I entirely elevate inside the heavy night, but my physical body is stuck on a dead end. I watch the heavily, entirely violent rules bend. Dead end avenues with absolutely no escape. We entirely trapped behind a heavy yellow tape. You walk a heavy mile just to end up right back here. I breathe the entirely heavy in the dirty air. The literal street is completely blocked by heavy stone. I navigate the entirely heavy dark alone. The metaphorical trap is a heavy project cage. I turn another entirely heavily violent page. Yeah. Turn around. Nothing entirely there. Look. I blow the heavy smoke completely at the project sky. I watch the heavy undercovering entirely roll by. The dead end avenue is a heavily violent trap. I completely memorize the entirely heavy map. You gotta build wings to entirely completely fly. I sit inside the heavy dead end and slowly die. The Shaolin Island is a heavily entirely closed loop. I sit upon a heavily entirely dirty stoop. I use the heavy rhythm to completely break the wall. I watch the entirely heavily fake brothers fall. The avenue stops, but the entirely
heavy mind goes. I absolutely know how the entirely dark wind blows. The dead end is a totally, completely heavy lie. If you completely, entirely reach for the heavy sky, I turn around completely from the heavy project gate and entirely rewrite my heavily violent fate. Shaolin. Find a way out. Let the beat fade out. Shaolin. The concrete never talks back. Check it. Look, I spark the iron lung and blow a heavy thick cloud. I never speak my total hidden secrets out loud. You tell a human being and the rumor starts to spread. I talk entirely to the heavily solid brick instead. The Shaolin projects got a completely different code. I walk the absolute, entirely, completely lonely road. I lean my heavy shoulder on a dirty project stone. I do my heavy thinking when I stand exactly alone. The plaster and the mortar keep a heavily tight lip. I hold the entire heavy metal upon my hip. They never put a wire on a heavily cinder block. I listen to the ticking of the heavily mental clock. The project wall is catching every single silent tear. I breathe the absolutely heavy, dirty Shaolin air. You trust a human being, you completely play a fool. I graduate entirely from the heavy, gritty school. Brick wall confessions in the entirely heavy dark. I leave my absolute, entirely heavy mental mark. The concrete is the only loyal friend I ever had. The violent environment is entirely heavy and bad. I trust the heavy mortar and the heavy project brick. The human race is making me entirely heavy and sick. The wall is keeping every single heavy secret safe. I navigate the entirely heavy dark project space. I tap my heavy knuckle on the completely solid wall and never let a heavy project brother take a fall. I tell the bricks about the heavy pain inside my chest. The concrete always gives my heavy mental state of rest. The undercover cops can never interrogate the street. The pavement never ever talks about the people meet. I drop a heavily smooth rhyme entirely for the alleyway, surviving for another entirely heavy project day. The walls are theirs, but they do not have a heavy tongue. I breathe the heavy smoke entirely deep into my lung. I keep my heavy circle absolutely entirely closed. The fake entirely project brothers violently exposed. The bricks completely understand the heavy street pain. I stand entirely silent in the heavy acid rain. The Shaolin on the texture is a heavy silent vault. The absolutely heavy violent project street fault. Brick wall confessions in the entirely heavy dark. I leave my absolute entirely heavy mental mark. The concrete is the only loyal friend I ever had. The violent environment is entirely heavy and bad. I trust the heavy mortar and the heavy project brick. The human race is making me entirely heavy and sick. The wall is keeping every single heavy secret safe. I navigate the entirely heavy dark project space. Yeah. Wu-Tang. Totally solid. Look, I leave a heavy tag entirely on the project brick. The graffiti is making entirely heavy plaster thick. I write my heavy secrets in a completely hidden code. The absolutely heavy, entirely violent project mode. The building structure holds the heavy project history. A completely heavily dark and entirely silent mystery. I walk away completely from the heavy talking crowd. The project wall is standing entirely heavily and proud. You wanna know my heavy thoughts, you gotta ask the stone. I sit inside the heavy dark entirely all alone. The brick wall confessions keep my heavy mind intact. The absolutely heavy violent project street fact. Shaolin. Peace to the concrete. Let the beat fade out. I know exactly who was under that mask. Look, we used to play together in the heavy project dirt, but now I see the envy in your absolutely heavy shirt. You watch my heavy pockets getting entirely fat. I see you turning into a completely heavy rat. The jealousy is eating up your completely heavy mind.
You leave a heavily, entirely loyal past behind. I bought the heavy chain and I see a heavy stare. The tension is incredibly heavy in the project air. You think I do not notice how you entirely heavily look? You reading from a totally, entirely jealous book. The brotherhood is breaking down entirely in the dust. There is absolutely nobody that I can heavy trust. I see the heavy greed entirely taking complete control. It eats away your heavily, entirely loyal soul. Jealousy wears a completely heavy black ski mask to execute a heavily, entirely violent task. I see the familiar eyes behind the heavy wool. My entirely heavy iron magazine is completely full. You robbed a heavily, entirely loyal childhood friend. I watch a heavily, entirely violent story end. Jealousy wears a completely heavy black ski mask to execute a heavily, entirely violent task. I hear the heavy footsteps coming up the project stair. I smell the entirely heavy betrayal in the cold air. You kick the heavy door and you point the heavy steel. I know exactly how your entirely fake heart feel. You try to heavily disguise your entirely heavy voice, but you already made your heavily, absolutely violent choice. I know the heavy way you hold the totally heavy gun. I know exactly how you entirely heavily project run. The mask is hiding entirely nothing from my eyes. I see the heavily, absolutely, totally dark lies. You want the heavy stash that I entirely heavily built. You do not have a single ounce of heavily project guilt. I stare entirely down a heavily absolute black hole and watch you lose your heavily, entirely project soul. Jealousy wears a completely heavy black ski mask to execute a heavily, entirely violent task. I see the familiar eyes behind the heavy wool. My entirely heavy iron magazine is completely full. You robbed a heavily, entirely loyal childhood friend. I watch a heavily, entirely violent story end. Jealousy wears a completely heavy black ski mask to execute a heavily, entirely violent task. Yeah. Take the mask off. I already know. Look, I keep my heavy hand entirely on the project grip. I watch you entirely heavily shaking lower lip. The ski mask cannot hide your entirely heavy sweat. You making your absolutely heavily worst street bet. I used to break my entirely heavy bread with you. I know exactly what you entirely heavily plan to do. The envy is a poison in the absolutely heavy vein. It brings a completely entirely heavy project pain. I do not even absolutely heavily raise my voice. I leave you with a completely heavily violent choice. You drop the heavy metal or you absolutely heavy die. I look entirely right into your heavily jealous eye. The Shaolin streets are completely heavily, entirely cold. The saddest heavy project story ever heavily told. Watch your brothers, let the beat fade out. Yeah. They say blood is thick, but the paper is entirely thicker. Look. We used to share a heavily entirely small plate before the money brought the absolutely heavy hate. My own flesh and blood is completely acting strange. I watch the heavy dollar make the family change. You look into my eyes and only see a heavy vault. The greed is entirely heavily violent fault. We share a mother and the heavily entirely last name, but we are playing in a totally different game. The paper completely washes the heavy blood away. I see the jealousy entirely heavy on display. You want the heavy ground that I completely built myself. You want the absolutely entirely heavy project wealth. The loyalty is completely entirely totally dead. I keep my entirely heavy weapon absolutely fed. Money is thicker than the heavily project blood. The family loyalty is drowning in the mud. You played your own brother for a heavy paper stack. I watch you put a heavy knife into my back. Money is thicker than the heavily project blood. Your family loyalty is drowning in the mud. The greed is a heavily entirely deadly disease. It brings the heavy family entirely to its knees. I sit across the table at the heavy family meal. I know exactly how you entirely fake heart feel. You plotting on my heavy stash inside your head. I calculate the entirely heavy words you said. The DNA is entirely, absolutely no defense against the heavily, entirely violent project sense. You let the heavy paper entirely cloud your mind. You leave the absolutely heavy brotherhood behind. I gave you everything you entirely heavily need, but I cannot satisfy the absolutely heavy greed. You look at me like I am just a heavy dollar sign. You absolutely crossed the heavily, entirely violent line. The Shaolin Island is a completely lonely space. I see the heavy envy entirely on your face. Money is thicker than the heavily project blood. The family loyalty is drowning in the mud. You trade your own brother for a heavy paper stack. I watch you put a heavy knife into my back. Money is thicker than the heavily project blood. The family loyalty is drowning in the mud. The greed is a heavily, entirely deadly disease. It brings a heavy family entirely to its knees. Yeah. Well, look at what the paper did. Tore the whole tree down. Look. I like the heavy door entirely on my own kin. Decree is a completely, entirely heavy project sin. You sold your heavy soul to get a totally heavy bag. I watch your entirely heavily loyal spirit lag. The money turned my brother to a heavy street snake. I calculate the entirely heavily violent move you make. The family tree is completely heavily burning down. I wear the absolutely heavy and lonely project crown. I keep my heavy distance from the totally fake ties. I see the absolutely heavy, totally dark lies. The blood is entirely washing down the heavy drain. I navigate the entirely heavily violent project pain. The paper entirely destroyed the heavy family trust and turned our heavily loyal history into dust. Shaolin. I watch your own blood, the grief fade out.
What? The corner store is sacred until it is not. Come on, look. I walk inside the bodega to get a heavy drink. I need a single second just to sit and think. The corner store is a complete neutral space. Nobody ever brings the drama to this place. The man behind the counter knows exactly who I am. He cutting up the heavy turkey and the ham. I let my heavy guard down for a minute flat. I pet the completely lazy heavy bodega cat. But then I hear the little bell upon the door. I feel the heavy tension dropping to the floor. The enemy stepping inside the neutral ground. I listen to the entirely heavy violent sound. The unspoken street rules are getting heavily tossed. The line of absolute respect is finally crossed. I turn around completely ready for the fight. I spark the heavy iron in the neon light. The bodega sanctuary turned into a wall. Blood completely spilling on the dirty floor. You broke the sacred rule and now you gotta bleed. I plant a heavily, entirely violent seed. The glass is shattering across the heavy street. I bring the entirely heavy violent street heat. What? I drop the heavy bottle right upon the tile. I wipe away the entirely fake and heavy smile. I pull the heavy iron straight out of my coat. I aim it right exactly at a heavy throat. The chips and candy flying in the heavy air. I give the heavy devil an entirely blank stare. The cooler shattering and spraying heavy glass. I watch the violently heavy sudden moments pass. I duck behind the entirely heavy ATM. I spit a heavy hollow point right back at them. The neutral zone is absolutely torn apart. I feel the heavy pumping of my violent heart. You disrespect the corner store, you disrespect the block. I completely heavily, entirely load the heavy Glock. I scream entirely loud and let the heavy metal ring. I listen to the absolutely violent hollow point sing. The bodega sanctuary turned into a wall. Blood completely spilling on the dirty floor. You broke the sacred rule and now you gotta bleed. I'm playing a heavily, entirely violent seed. The glass is shattering across the heavy street. I bring the entirely heavy violent street heat. What? Come on, you want it? Smoke is clearing out the heavy grocery aisle. I walk across the completely heavy bloody tile. I look at the owner entirely hiding in the back. I am completely sorry for the heavy dark attack, but survival is the only heavily absolute law. The most entirely violent thing he ever saw. I step right over the heavily broken enemy frame. I leave my completely entirely heavily violent name. The sanctuary is completely absolutely gone. We taking the heavy warfare out onto the lawn. I push the heavy shattered entirely broken door. I walk away completely from the heavy ruined store. The sirens wailing in the absolutely heavy night. The dog completely won the absolutely heavy fight. Never safe. Nowhere. What? Let the beat fade out.